Welcome to USA Watchdog. I'm Greg Hunter. There's about 5 or 6 guests I tell you about that every, 6 weeks, 4 weeks. People start emailing me. People start commenting on the website, on the YouTube channel to get this person back. Get this guy back. Where is he? And I'm talking about Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former assistant Treasury Secretary in the Reagan administration. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, thank you for joining us today on USA Watchdog.
It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, I know you have a very deep resume, editor to Wall Street Journal. You have a PhD in economics. I'm just grazing over your resume. Your father of Reaganomics. You know a lot about money, and I think that's what a lot of the problems around the world really are about. But I want to start, when we did the pre-interview, I said, I guess we'll talk about, maybe Russia. And he said, well, a lot can happen between now and, then. And sure enough, last week, Russia, imposes these sanctions back on the West. It's $17.5 billion worth total, the brunt of which is not going to fall on countries like the U.S. and Canada, but the European Union, the biggest exporter of agricultural products to Russia. I had read an AP story saying that, this really won't hurt. This will hurt Russia more than the European Union. And I'm thinking, what? Anyway, what say you about this tit for tat? We're back to, now Russia is putting some pretty heavy sanctions, and it's fallen on the EU. What say you?
Well, I think that the Russian government had to do that in order to stop the sanctions from accelerating. Europe is not used to being independent or having its own foreign policy. It has its foreign policy dictated by Washington. And so Europe has never had its heart in these sanctions. And Europe doesn't gain from the conflict that the United States is creating with Russia. They only lose. And so I think Putin realized that if he does nothing, then the United States will be able to pressure Europe for more sanctions. And so he's showing Europe that this can bite back, and they're not particularly inclined to cooperate with the United States on this matter. And so I think he made the right decision, or the Russian government made the decision. He's not a dictator. And that this will cause the Europeans to realize that agreeing to the United States setting their foreign policy is very expensive to them. So that may cause them to resist or to assert their independence. Some of the countries that are hurt the worst are the smaller ones, like Greece and Austria. And they're right now extremely angry because they were already in difficulties, especially Greece. So this anger will spread, and it will reverberate, and it will work to Putin's advantage, not to Washington's.
What are your sources saying? I mean, you have global sources. People are pinging you all the time. What are you hearing about how this is going over in Europe?
Well, it's not going over. It's not clear because the European press always follows Washington's line. But now we see a major break. Today, I think it was, Handelsblatt. This is the main financial newspaper of Germany. It's like the Wall Street Journal of Germany. And it came out with a very strong statement by the editor-in-chief that the direction that the United States was pushing things is contrary to common sense, and it's contrary to the interest of Germany. And so we've now had possibly the major voice in the media in Germany come out and say, we can't go along with this. It's time for Germany to find a more sensible course. And that this policy of the Americans of always escalating every conflict is the kind of nonsense that gave us World War I. and we've never really recovered from that. And therefore, this is a break in the ranks, and this is, as I'll say, is probably the most important newspaper in Europe.
Could this undermine NATO? I mean, is that what Putin is going after? In my weekly news wrap-up last week, there have been kind of speculation that, Putin may invade. Wesley Clark says, that would have unimaginable consequences. And I'm thinking, does he have to invade, or can he just wait till winter? I mean, did everybody forget that he supplies massive amounts of natural gas to Europe? I mean, what happens this winter when people are heating their homes and businesses and Russia says, hey, we're not going to give you a deal on this gas. You pay double or triple, or we're sending it to China. I don't know.
I think the talk about Russia invading, that's the American military security complex, so they can beef up their budgets and have more taxpayer monies allocated to the military security complex. It's just propaganda. And of course, the British Defense Committee is following the same line. So we have a tiny little Britain talking about how it's got to step up and protect Europe from Russia, as if Britain could do that.
But you say that's just, they're not going to, in your mind, they're not going to invade. Russia's not thinking about it.
Russia's not going to invade anyone, and I don't think they're going to turn off the gas unless the Europeans allow themselves to be pressured again into further sanctions by Washington. If that happens, I think that's when, and I don't even know then if the Russian government will turn off the gas. They're most likely just to call up the European capitals and say, look, you're going to get the gas turned off if you don't find your own independent foreign policy and deal with us like grown-ups. As long as you sit there and aid and abet the fools in Washington every time they escalate something that is about nothing that we can't resolve. I mean, nothing has happened, and it's all propaganda. So if you keep aiding and abetting the Americans in escalating a molehill into a mountain, then you're going to find yourself without any energy, because we're not just going to sit here forever and let you act like a child. So I think that's the most likely thing that the Russian government would do, and I think at that point the Europeans would realize they're being forced into actions that are of no benefit to them whatsoever and are entirely part of Washington playing the bully, trying to dominate other countries. So I don't think this is going to work out well for Washington. What I'm afraid of, Greg, is that Washington is reckless. And as the Handelsblatt, the newspaper itself, said, Washington doesn't have any diplomacy. It uses force and threats. And it's not smart enough to have diplomacy. And the danger of force and threats is they can lead to war.
Yes. Yes.
So this is the issue that I've posed, and this is the issue now that the main German financial paper, Handelsblatt, is posing, and it will cause a lot of thought. It's very well written. It shows a level of intelligence far above anything you can find in the American media. I mean, the people at the New York Times or the Washington Post, these people, compared to this editorial, they couldn't write anything that good. So I think it's going to cause a lot of thought, and it shows the kind of leadership I was hoping would come out of Germany. So this editorial, putting its foot down, saying, we've got to say no to the Americans. This is not in our interest. It's not in the interest of the world. It's not in Europe's interest. I think this is a good sign, and it could well be that this will blow over because Washington has behaved in such an unreasonable way. You know, they've caused a crisis with no evidence. just propaganda.